Hello children, this is grade 8 social science, and in this session we are going to discuss the first chapter of history, that is how, when and where. As in the previous videos we discussed the topics like how important are dates, which dates are important, and how do we periodize, the problem of the periodization, what is colonial. And in this video we are going to discuss the last subtopic, that is administration produces records. Now, what is this administration produces records? So, as half of the chapter already we completed, and now how do we know about the last 250 years of Indian history? Just if I'll ask you what happened 3 years ago in your life, then you will be able to tell. 10 years back what happened, you will tell. But if 20 years back, then you will tell that yes, my parents gave this information. And if I ask you about 250 years, then your parents also may not tell about it. So how we come to know about what happened 250 years ago? We usually know from the books, or we read it in history or in movies. There are so many sources. But specifically, if we'll understand from where do we get these sources, then it is from administration. How they produce, will tell you. Official records of the British administration. British administration means when Britishers were ruling our country, that period. The officers produced some records like how much tax to be collected, or how much tax collected, and which person went to jail, or this person has to pay fine for all these things and all. So they used to maintain these records in administration, means the British officers. Every instruction, plan, policy, decision, agreement, investigations had to be clearly written up. The Britishers felt like that it's very important to be written up all the information. So every instruction means, like, suppose British officials was giving any instruction to anybody, or agreement with king, or investigation done in the kingdom, so all these things were clearly to be written. So after writing, they preserved very carefully, and they set up some record rooms which were attached to all administrative institutions. All the records were preserved in record rooms. Now lot of changes have come, like everything is preserved digitally. But 50 years ago, when computer was not there, people used to write everything in government records. If you see in government offices, they keep so many books in rooms, and all the data was preserved very carefully. So these record rooms were attached to administrative institutions like police stations, collectorate offices, etc. Now apart from this, there were some specialized institutions also, like archives and museums. Archives and museums were also established to preserve important records. So all the written up records maintained very carefully. So the person who wrote about history also got information through these records. Only when he started reading and understanding the records, then only he started writing about history. Letters and memos that moved from one branch to the other branch. Letters like personal letters, like the Britishers, if they have wrote letter to his wife who is in another country, and he got revert to that maybe when they left they did not carry all these letters, so that the letters also gave lot of information. In the same way, they preserved very carefully letters and memos. These documents were carefully copied out and beautifully written by calligraphists. So you know about handwriting competition. In the same way, in those days, people who have beautiful handwriting used to be given to write records. Like if you have good handwriting, so you sit in one place and copy it. So with the spread of printing, multiple copies of these records were printed as proceedings of each government department. So as the printing was developed, newspapers and all earlier there were calligraphists, they used to write and preserve, but as printing machines developed, slowly they increased the record copies. This is all about British administrative records, how the administration produces records. Now the next source is about surveys. Surveys become important. Surveys means to examine area of land or any. Now in this, the practice of surveying also become very common under the colonial administration. The Britishers, they believed that a country had to be properly known before it could be effectively administered. And by the early 19th century, they have started detailed surveys were being carried out to map the entire country. In the villages, revenue surveys were conducted. Revenue surveys means like money through tax. And apart from that, there were others also, like other surveys like topography, the soil quality, the flora, fauna, all these. So now Britishers, apart from topography, soil quality, the flora, fauna and revenue surveys and all, there were a number of other surveys also, like local histories and the cropping pattern were also carried out. And the census operations also began to held after every 10 years. Now census means what? Census means like it is an official count or else surveys, especially of a population. So it was also produced record of the people such as number, caste, religion and occupation. There were many other surveys too, like botanical survey, geological survey, archaeological survey, anthropological survey and forest surveys. Now the last one is what official records do not tell. So what official records do not tell us? So by working on those records, we have learnt that in those days these things and all happened. So history was written like that. But the question arises like, while writing records from official records, some matters omit. Now in this topic we are going to see what all matters omit. Basically, heading tells us that from the official records, administration and surveys, history was written, but there is an absence of Indian perspective. History was written according to the perspective of the British government. It means British were ruling and they used to conduct surveys. They were administering. So according to the profit of Britishers, they have written according to their perspective. Whatever they have seen, they wrote. Like James Mill had written history, and the way he had written it tells us that Indians were very primitive and colonial rule could civilize India. So he kept his perspective. In the same way, while writing history, British government written according to their perspective, and it was an absence of Indian perspective. But here Indians and Indian perspective left behind. What Indians were thinking that time, how they felt, what was their actions, everything left behind. So here absence of Indian perspective, because Britishers written according to their perspective and Indian perspective was left behind. Official records is the biased history. Official records tells us what the officers thought, the record which is written on the basis of officials, what they were interested in and what they wished to preserve for posterity. They wanted to tell to posterity that at the time of Britishers, they were very good. Now, like you children study in 8th grade and you are learning about history, and teachers might have told you that because of Britishers only the railways came and education system came and a lot of development seen. I'm not saying that Britishers were bad, but the Britishers have written that we have provided the development in India. As we know that the Britishers were not good, but because of them lot of development seen, like railways, education system came. It's not good, but Britishers have written that we provided the development in India. They brought railways, but it is their profit only, because to export and import goods it helps and they need it. That they did not bring railways for Indians, but they left India. Means it's not like they'll take the tracks also along with them. Yes, they have done good also, but they depict like they have done everything for India. They brought education system, but they did not bring it for Indians. They thought if they educate Indians so that they can work under them and speak English. So official records tells us what the officers thought, what they were interested in, and what they wished to preserve for posterity. In reality, it may be different. So, in reality, the context may be different. The history which Britishers wrote on that context, reality may be different. Therefore, history must be looked from other perspective also. How? While writing history with a broad heading, how do we know? Then, with the administrative, with the surveys, we come to know about history. And at the same time, with the diaries of people, accounts of pilgrims and travelers, autobiographies of important personalities, idea of leaders and reformers, poets and novelists' work, so we come to know some other perspective through them. Through the administrative and surveys, one perspective is left behind. So, there are also the other sources of history to write. So, what official records do not tell us? They lack the Indian perspective while writing. In official records, Indian perspective was not included. So, you will get Indian perspective through diaries of people, travelers, autobiographies, reformers, etc. Yet, the history lacks the perspective of peasants, workers, and tribals. Getting to know their lives was more difficult task. So we have seen one whole British perspective and half we have seen of Indian perspective. Now the rest half is like peasants, workers, tribals, about these people. Because these people were uneducated, that's why we know very less about them. Like getting to know their lives was more difficult task, because there is no written material or no source to know about them. From where do we get all these things? To know the whole 8th grade book is about Indian perspective and administrative records, surveys, peasants, tribals, and all these. Thank you, children.